Welcome to Savvy Women Talk Tech. I'm Glenda Brady, the Managing Director of the UK and Ireland for Orange Business Services.
And I'm Brandy Presti, Strategic Global Business Partner for the Americas for Orange Business Services.
In this podcast, we're celebrating some of the successful female leaders in the tech industry and examining the challenges the industry faces when it comes to gender balance.
In this episode specifically, we're looking at the business case for gender balance. We're joined by Dunya Benamara Muller, a Senior Partner Manager at Equinix, and also by Nemo Verbist, a Senior Vice President of Europe at Orange Business Services.
Hi, Nemo. Hi, Dunya. Great to have you with us.
Hi, Glenda.
Hi, Glenda. Hi, Brandy. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we want to begin by looking at how the gender balance of the tech industry has evolved during your career, Dunya. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. The tech industry often originates at schools or in universities. So if I look back when I was a student in computer science and later business informatics, the female students represented less than 10%, while today, through my role at Kinetic as a mentor of young ladies studying IT, they report that female would represent at least a third of the students. So a big step in my opinion. And also when I compare the overall percentage of women working at Equinix globally, today being more than 25%. And when I started 8 years ago, we nearly doubled that ratio today. So a big increase.
I think that's a great point. You know, I can remember starting out in the industry and I would be the only woman in a room. And today, certainly with the likes of yourself and Glenda and others that we work with, the industry has really changed.
Although Brandy and Dunya, we're still often the only women in the room.
Well, today I'm the only man in the room, so
Very good point.
I now understand what it feels like. Yeah.
Touche.
Thanks, Nemo. Maybe a question for you. Would you have any personal examples of where an improved gender balance has brought benefits to a team?
Yeah, let me share a story with you, probably a simple one to make my point. But a couple of years ago, I was in a meeting with a Silicon Valley startup, and we were going to meet with this startup with the board of directors from our side, the company I was working in, which were all like old men, basically, gray suits, white hair. We went quite unprepared to that meeting, so we were not sure who was going to present to us or talk to us. And when we ended up in the meeting room, we were basically seeing that the CEO was a young female, young woman, Asian descent, and her CEO was also a woman. And basically that felt very uncomfortable. The gray old men talking to this young, vibrant, very intelligent, startup-alike women in Silicon Valley. Very awkward. So we changed that. We changed the dynamics in our own team because of that meeting, actually, because we were going to do a proposal on acquisition of that company. That got us nowhere with the way we went in the meeting. So we changed the dynamics of our own team. And that really helped when we spoke to other companies in the same type of setup. And it's about balance, I think. You should have the right balance. As we sell into the world, half of the world is women. So if your team consists of men only, then there is a big issue. And it's about balance. You have to get that balance right.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think in Europe, we're now seeing customers as well, where the CIO and some of her direct reports are female as well. And we have been traditionally going in with teams of men, and we're trying to adjust as well to that new dynamic within the customer. It's a great story. Thanks for sharing, Nemo.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think often too, I don't know for others on this call, I have a little girl, she's 3. And I often say to her, you're a great leader, instead of telling her she's bossy, right? Because we want to seek to create balance and to let even the next generation know that they too have the ability to be the next, woman CEO. So I think that's a really great story. Dunya, over to you. You work as a mentor and head up the women's network at Equinix. Why did you see a need to become involved in those type of organizations? Really interested to understand that.
Well, I felt the need to get involved so I can make young women or female colleagues benefit of my experience. and make them avoid going through the same challenging path as the one I went 15 years ago. So when I started my career, I was not only the only girl on my team, I was also the youngest by far. And my role models and mentors back in time were all men and of a certain seniority. And finally, so many of my acquired skills back in time were influenced by them, such as communication style or conflict management. So some years later, after gaining some experience in my field, I realized that by being authentic, by being a woman, I was more self-confident, as I wasn't trying to behave like someone else. And eventually I was even more successful. So I wish I could have had access to women or women networks like we do have today, like for instance in Equinix, and get that guidance.
2 years ago, I think you joined us at the European Sales Kickoff for our first women-only event during the Sales Kickoff, to which we invited all of the partners. And it was really great because there were so many women in the room and we were all sharing the same challenges and issues. And I think what surprised us all was actually how many of us there were in the room, because we didn't have enough place to sit down and eat lunch. So yes, and it was super important for us all to share experience there as well.
Absolutely.
In that context, I have another example. Listening to Dunya's story, I often think, what would my mother-in-law do in a particular situation? My mother-in-law is very hands-on. She's a mother of 3 kids. She has grandchildren, and she knows how to manage complexity. So often when I'm in front of a problem, I try to think, what would she do in this case? How would she tackle this? And that often helps in creating different solutions to a problem.
I like the anecdote, and I'll remind you of that the next time we're in a meeting together, Nima. I'll ask you the question, what would your mother-in-law do? What I think we've been all seeing a lot in the papers recently and on different blogs about diversity and how important it is for companies. And in fact, what we've also seen is there's an increasing amount of evidence that the more diverse a company is, the more innovative it is. For example, companies with above average diversity saw 19% more innovation revenues and had 9% higher EBIT margins on average, according to a Harvard Business Review report. So a question I have for both of you, and maybe we can start with Dunya, is how can tech businesses encourage diversity and therefore innovation?
I believe by first having a diversity strategy in place, which will form a kind of critical foundation on which the whole organization can take action and drive progress. That strategy should be a mix of challenging the as-is situation, including challenging stereotypes, fighting biases, and broadening perceptions, as well as nurturing and empowering environment so that people can be themselves and ultimately innovate, succeed. And only when the whole organization, including all management layers, act, then diversity and inclusion start becoming part of the culture and its values. So if I identify myself, I develop a sense of true belonging, which would make me thrive at some point.
Thanks. I think that's a great example. Thank you, Dunya. Nimo.
Well, I think it starts probably at the education level and the way that we decide what we want to study in college. And I think there is a role for us as a company to probably expose some of the career options that you have in certain roles, in certain education disciplines. For instance, STEM, where we see that there is still a majority of men going in that direction. But there is actually very exciting jobs that I'm sure women would love to do as well. So I think it's our role as IT companies to go and promote future options in those different education disciplines. Another thing we need to do is we need to help women actively. For instance, startups. I already mentioned it, but there's a lot of startup initiatives. There is not that many that support women actively, and I think we as a company have a role to play there as well, to actively support organizations that basically help women to succeed in a startup position. And then the final one, I think, is that we have to support associations that promote and encourage women to go for an IT career or for a technology career. I think we as a company also have an active role to play there, for instance, by providing internships to those organizations so that we can have more women in our workplace.
I think that's very interesting, especially on the startups, because we do know that women struggle to get venture capital as much as their male counterparts, even though the statistics show that their businesses tend to be more successful in the long run. And there are some agencies in place who are addressing that now. And Dunia has certainly inspired me to go out and speak to schools and to speak to more women in schools. And I actually have a young lady from a local school in Slough who will be shadowing me in the office for a few days post-coronavirus to see what it's like to work in the tech industry. So both of you have definitely inspired me there.
Glad to hear. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's great, Glenda. I think we often wait for things to come to us, right? So the fact that you're making the time to do that is what I think all of us wish maybe many years ago that we had the opportunity to do. So that's a really good story. Dunia, you said something that really kind of hit me, and I didn't think about it, but it's worth noting that years ago, we may have been in a room where we didn't feel that we had a voice. But as we seek to look at gender diversity and gender balance now, if we feel appreciated at work, if our opinions are viewed as sort of respected and we have a seat at the table, that it makes sense why we would be more successful as an organization, right? Because we're bringing our best self to the business and sharing our ideas more openly. And so I guess that leads us to sort of the next question, which is, can tech businesses afford not to take gender diversity seriously? So, do we think that they actually lose money because they fail to retain women? I mean, Dunia, what are your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I think if you surround yourself with people who look like you, talk like you, had potentially the same education as you, and ultimately think like you will have the very same, as we call it, blind spots as them. You will miss the same trends, curves in the road, and opportunities eventually. So I'm totally convinced that could lead to losing money and market share.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I really do. I think it's really important, especially when it comes to, diversity in general in the workplace, right? Different experiences yield different results. So I think that's a great point. Thank you, Dunia.
So maybe an easy one to finish up and to wrap up. And I think both of you will have loads of answers for this one. But can you give some examples of best practice within the industry of programs and schemes that encourage diversity and promote gender equality? And maybe mention how that has benefited the company. And maybe we'll start with Nemo this time.
So in Orange, we do a yearly gap analysis program, which is run by HR, where we basically compare salaries between men and women. Then we do the gap analysis, and if there is outliers or gaps, then we will address that with the managers to see what the reason behind that is, and then we will also close the gap where needed, so that we equalize those salaries. And in some countries, we even report this to governments. For instance, in Spain and in the UK. So that's one thing we do. Another thing we do is when writing job descriptions, we make it gender neutral, because I see often they are not gender neutral. They're very male focused, and we want to basically attract women as well. So that's something else we deliberately look at.
No, and definitely, Nemo, I like the last one, and that's something I was trying to change when I joined the European sales and marketing team. When you read a job description that asks for a salesperson who's competitive and has a killer instinct, it doesn't really always appeal to the female of us gender. Dunia, on your side, do you have some examples as well to share?
Yeah, I think I have two examples. One being Accenture. I think they're all famous in that area. I think they were one of the first pioneers in the tech industry to tackle that challenge, the gender challenge. And they have introduced a so-called women's quota with the objective to achieve a gender balance by, I think, 2025, with 50% women, 50% men. And if I'm not wrong, I think they are currently at 40%, which is amazing. And they launched several initiatives like the talent program called Women in Technology, helping high-performing females to fast-track their career, and many other initiatives. I think it's quite impressive what they've been doing. The other example is, of course, Equinix. We invested in a global program that connects women. On a quarter basis, we would host several events, providing women with guidance around their career development, personal development, but as well focusing on the well-being side. And additionally to that, Equinix has defined diversity and inclusion as critical competencies and prerequisites for both recruitment and promotions. That's extremely present in our daily business.
That was Dunya from Equinix and Nemo from Orange Business Services, chatting with me, Brandy Presti.
And me, Glenda Brady. Thank you for listening to Savvy Women Talk Tech, the podcast where we celebrate some of the successful female leaders in the tech industry and examine the challenges the industry faces when it comes to gender balance.